intention isn't to make fun of anyone for it, by the way. I don't want South Londoners or East Londoners to come and beat my ass because they seem to... So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about Black Londoners and what I think the concept of Londoner actually is, or what it's become, and how much it's affecting Black Britain by way of affecting Black Londoners. I don't know if it's just me. It could be just me. I doubt it is. But every so often I will meet a Black person, or any person, I guess, who's from London, who treats the fact that they're from London like it's part of their character. It's quite interesting. I don't know if you guys have ever met a Black Londoner who seems to like lead with the idea that they are a Londoner. They don't tell you what they do. They don't tell you what they're into. They don't tell you anything about who they are. They don't tell you anything. They tell you, I'm from London, and they expect you that to mean something that's supposed to land somewhere. Sometimes it's not just being a Londoner. It can be a very specific part of London, and it's spoken about as if it's a credential, like it's something for them, like it's doing something for them in that conversation. My intention isn't to make fun of anyone for it, by the way. I don't want South Londoners or East Londoners to come and beat my ass because they seem to... I don't want anyone to come and beat my ass, okay? I am trying to understand it. And I guess that's what the point of this video is today, was when I was thinking about why do people do this? I really want to understand. I think I understand the instinct, but I've been sitting with the question for a while. What exactly is the term doing when people say that? What work is the word Londoner actually performing when a Black person says it in particular? Because I don't think it's anything to do with geography. Maybe at one point it was, but I don't think it is anymore. I think that it's become something else, and it's very indicative of the time that we're in and the vulnerabilities that Black British people are experiencing in said time. I think the term Londoner is a brand. So here's what I mean by that. When a Black British professional or creative or activist identifies very strongly as a Londoner, what they're often signalling is a politic, okay? To be a Londoner is to be cosmopolitan, it's to be progressive, to be liberal. It's a shortcut sometimes to credibility. And it's actually something that I kind of hated as a Londoner, especially growing up, and especially as I made that transition from being in my late teens to my early 20s, like leaving university, because at this point I started to meet more people who were not from London, who were very excited to adopt this idea of being the Londoner, and I always wondered why, because it felt like it was something that was being taken from me, and I didn't understand why that is. But it's because it's a brand with brand value, and a brand can't have endless ambassadors. It's got to have a sense of, it's got to have its audience, it's got to have a sense of exclusivity to its audience, right? And with this politic, right, this liberal, cosmopolitan, progressive politic, you don't have to show you're working out. You know, Londoner does it for you, or your postcode does it for you. It tells you everything you need to know. I have been dating and one of the things that keeps coming up is the fact that I'm from Northwest London, which is being perceived actually quite a lot as me being from West London. And wow, people immediately start to make assumptions about my upbringing because of that. So let's say I was from West London. I have no problems with people actually thinking I'm from West London, because the part of Northwest London I'm from, Brent, it is very closely tied with the West London boroughs that are attached to it. So it annoys me when somebody says I'm a North Londoner, because I'm like, culturally we are not the same at all.
So we're taking over, so we're taking over, so we're taking over, so we're taking over. He's about to blow, we're not gonna let these haters come and try to stop our flow.
Where do we come from?
But a West Londoner, yeah, culturally we're pretty fucking similar. I'm really similar to Caribbean people in West London as a Caribbean Northwest Londoner. And people make a lot of assumptions about how I've grown up, what my area is like, and I'm like, where the hell does that even come from? Like, it's still the same flipping city. And honestly, you can just Google the statistics to show that the thing that you think is not real. It's not true. But that's because when you are working with a brand, the point of branding is that people make assumptions. They make assumptions about the brand itself, and therefore they make assumptions about the customers. That's why we like the brands that we like, because they say something about us. And in that sense, calling yourself a Londoner then functions a lot like other forms of identity politics that we're quite critical of in other contexts, where the label is doing a lot of the heavy lifting so the individual doesn't have to. And then you don't ever have to interrogate your actual politics if your postcode has already spoken for you. You don't have to build a political community or a political identity if you can just point to the part of the city you're from and people are just supposed to understand it and supposed to understand you. I think it offers a lot of protection to some people, you know. They never have to actually do the work. They never have to pick up a book on the history of London or the history of their own racial group in the city. They just know that they're a Black Londoner and that means something. And I see this very much as the outsourcing of the self. The work of building a political identity is subcontracted to the entire city. And the reason I think this matters, the reason it's worth a whole video, in fact, is that I think it's doing some real damage. And I don't mean this in an abstract way. I don't mean it in a theoretical way. I'm saying this in a very concrete way, in a community level way. It is damaging to us on that level. And to understand what the damage is, then we have to follow the brand to its logical conclusion. So the first thing that you need to know is that every brand needs a periphery, a thing that it's not. That's the thing that makes it legible. So for example, when Reform UK started to gain traction in the UK, when, you know, this modern version of the National Front started putting down some roots, something quite interesting happened amongst Black Londoners. We really doubled down in our London identity when this rhetoric from Reform was emerging. A lot of people severed their identification as British people and retreated into the city. And I understand why, right? When the country feels hostile, you go to what feels like home. And what feels safe is to barricade yourself within your city, say that these are the boundaries, these are the borders where Reform will never cross. And that's why it's important for us to identify as Londoners. That's why London is an important place for us to identify with, because we're not like those other people, surely. But then I suppose in that, here's a question that nobody wants to ask. What does that move do to our relationship with Black people who are not in London? Black people in Birmingham, in Manchester, Sheffield, Bristol, Leeds. What about in rural areas? Like, I'm talking real countryside Britain or in the small towns of Britain. What happens to them in this mental map that we've created, this mental map of safety? And it reminded me of something so specific, which is in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, a European diplomat named Josip Borrell, he gave a speech in which he described Europe as a garden and the rest of the world as a jungle. And when he was making his case that war should never be in Europe, it didn't come from an anti-war perspective or an anti-violence perspective or an anti-colonial perspective. You'd be hard-pressed to find one of those in Europe. But it came from the perspective that Europe is a garden and it's safe and it's worth protecting and it's manicured and it's all the good things. Think of all the positive pastoral things we think of when we think of outside. And Africa and Asia and South America. That's where they have war, not here. Oh my God. This imagery was so strong, it really stayed with me. And that's what inspired the essay that this video is based on, which is on my Substack. And it's called, Are We the Monkeys in the Garden? Black Londoners rightly were amongst the people who called out that what Josip Borrell had said was part of Europe's long-standing colonial logic. The idea that civilization has a center and everything beyond it is wild. That is the idea that civilization has a center and everything beyond it is wild, it's underdeveloped, it's threatening. And then we quietly reproduce that same logic with barricading ourselves behind this identity of Londoner that Josip Borrell has done with the concept of Europe. London becomes the garden. It's safe, it's progressive, it's culturally sophisticated. Everything beyond the M25 becomes something more like a jungle, provincial, underdeveloped, and, you know, you guys know the term op. Everyone outside of London seems to be our op. And Black people in rural areas, in northern cities, in small towns, they also get absorbed into this framing, which is completely unfair. It's not through hatred, don't get me wrong. It's through something more insidious. Condescension. And I think it's worth sitting with. This is me sitting here waiting for you to sit here with it. Sit with that. It's worth sitting with because nothing, and I mean nothing, is more historically British than looking down on people whose culture is to be in the land and with their neighbours more than yours is. Think about how Europeans respond to places in Asia, Africa and South America, in particular indigenous communities where people have much stronger relationships with the land and with their neighbours, and the way this is looked down on. Their cultures are looked down on, they are underdeveloped, they're savages, they're tribalistic. We've basically done the same thing. But here's where it actually gets uncomfortable. If this brand, if London has become our political identity, our progressive credential, our shield, then we have to ask the question underneath it. Were we ever actually truly political? Or have we always just been reaching for some kind of proximity that will allow us to never have to identify as anything other than the civilized, sophisticated, cosmopolitan bunch? When I think about our elders, the foundational generation, and the thing that really strikes me about them every time is the shock that so many of them felt when they got here, right? I don't know about you guys, but parts of my family have come from rural parts of Jamaica, and they have a particular way of living, not just as people from, like, my granddad's from country, but as Jamaicans, as Caribbean people, as West Indians. They expected to be welcomed by the British, but they, not just tolerated, by the way, were actually welcomed. And that expectation was not radical. It was the opposite. It was a profound faith in the system that had colonized them. And a lot of our greatest thinkers wrote about what happened after this, right? So we've got C.L.R. James, Claude McKay, Sam Selvin, you guys should read this book, George Lamming, Darkest Howe, so on, so on, so on. These are not minor figures. These are the intellectual architects of the Black Atlantic, and running through all of their work is a common grief, a grief about the foundational fracture in that first generation. What they observed was this pull of proximity once they got to Britain in particular. So when we look at these people's work, they are critiquing the ways that at least Black Caribbean people and Indo-Caribbean people are being sucked into this British psyche, this European psyche. And I'm proposing that when we as Black Londoners do that thing where we pretend that everybody outside of the M25 is uncivilized, we are taking on European colonial logics. So what these writers, what these thinkers observed was this pull of proximity to whiteness and what it did to the political consciousness of Caribbean individuals, and how quickly that process took place as well. The class mobility that certain relationships seem to promise, the aspirations that certain relationships, friendships, or living in certain areas represented, and what those writers were grappling with, what many of them called in various ways a betrayal, was the moment when access got mistaken for transcendence, when belonging to the imperial centre got confused with being free of it. Another thing I'm going to let you sit with. And I don't tell this history to condemn the men or women who participated in these relationships, who had these friendships, who moved to whiter areas or sought to have the types of jobs that would gain them the respectability from the British state. I'm telling it because I think that impulse, the reaching for proximity, the mistaking of access for power has never truly left us. It just looks and sounds very different now. Think about the Canary Wharf career, the New Build Flat, the strategic partnership. These are not ruptures from our history. The reasons why they exist in Black British discourse is because they are a contemporary form of it. And this is something that I've noticed recently. You know, everybody's talking about the village. Every Black content creator, every community organizer, every wellness account, the village seems to be the goal. But how exactly do we speak about the village people? The people who actually represent that thing, if the village is the cure. Isn't it interesting that we've arrived at that exact concept? Interdependence, mutual support, communal life, people who know each other over time. That describes the life of Black people that we have already written off as behind, because we've told ourselves that where they're from, outside of London, is underdeveloped. But they already had the skills, the tools to help us cultivate the kind of community that we say that we want to live in, the kind of social safety that we say we want to live in. Why have we completely discounted these individuals? Because reform exists in their town. That should make us love them even more. Most of our histories are not even urban. They're not even suburban, which is what I was saying about my granddad, right? So my granddad has come from rural life, and to be quite frank, when I'm speaking to my friends from all over the world who are Black, most of us don't have backgrounds that are cosmopolitan or urban anyways. Most of us do come from these rural and small town backgrounds, from our parents and our grandparents. So the practices that we've inherited, the things that we associate with our own culture, that we love, respect, and revere in our own culture, are part of a culture that we're willing to write off when we're here because we're attached to where? London? London doesn't even bang like that. Yeah, so most of our histories are not urban. They're not even suburban. Caribbean history, a lot of it is rural. African history, hell of a lot of it is rural. I remember being on Black Girls camping trip one year, and one of my friends who's Somali said to me, oh, I love doing this because, you know, my clan is a nomadic clan. So whenever we're camping like this in England, I always feel like I'm participating in a culture that's been lost to me since my family moved to London, you know, when my mum was younger. And then her and her siblings were all born here in the UK. And that is part of the history of who we are. So it just, I don't know, I guess it surprises me how willing we are to sell out or to draw up really strict lines between who we are and what rural and small town culture looks and feels like, especially considering there are Black people scattered all over that place, all these places. So we descend from these plantations and from these villages and from these parishes. And when we visit Accra or Lagos, now most people are going to like events like that in December. We head to the cities for events, for the aesthetic, for the content. Meanwhile, the people who we actually know and the people who actually know how to live in relation to one another, the thing that we say that we're yearning for in this very, very lonely era, the people who maintain the knowledge of what it's like to actually exist in a village beyond the concept of a village, but the actual village, we sneer at them. We brand the structural underfunding of their areas as inherent regression. We confuse an imposed poverty with a chosen backwardness. And then we go home and we talk about wanting a village. It's so embarrassing, guys. I feel like I've said it, and now that I've said it, people might see it more. Maybe they'll get a bit of secondhand embarrassment when they're around Londoners who do the same thing. Like, it's just a bit... If our decolonization stops at the M25, then maybe it was always a performance. So this is the distinction that I want to make clearly, the one I think that a lot of us have been avoiding, that there is a fundamental difference between being Black and being a Londoner, and we have let those two things blur in a way that is costing us. Blackness is existential. It precedes choice and geography. It is what you were born into, a foundation, a network of relations, a set of inheritances that map across generations and across places. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be revoked. It can both be a burden and a balm, okay? But Londoner is circumstantial. It's where you happen to be. It can be revoked. Londoner is a matter of circumstance. It's circumstantial. It is where you happen to be. And it's slowly mutated from a descriptor into some sort of badge. And then from a badge into a brand. And that brand sells belonging as a product. And many of us have absorbed that logic so completely that we mistake it for our identity. To be in London is to matter. To leave is to slip into obscurity. And I've already spoken in my other videos about how much Black British people fear being in obscurity, being unknown, and how they have, you know, most of us have a great desire to be seen because we come from this very small and kind of bizarre community. But Blackness has always been migratory. You know, it's always given London some kind of texture and its sound and its language for as long as Blackness has been there in significant numbers. The city didn't arrive as well at a multicultural character through goodness or tolerance. We like to think of London as a multicultural haven, as though that the pursuit of that multicultural haven was not hard fought for. Yes, other parts of the country are racist, and probably even much more so. But London was also the place where people were being lynched left, right and centre through the 70s and the 80s.
You can't ask Clinton McCurbin about him asphyxiation, and you can't ask Joy Gordon about her suffocation. You can't ask Colin Roach if him really shoot himself, and you can't ask Vincent Graham if it's him stab himself. But you can ask the commissioner about the license to kill. Ask Sir Paul Condon about the license to kill. You can't ask the Douglas them about the new style baton, and you can't ask Tony Hassan about him death by neglect. You can't ask Marlon Downs if him have any regret, and you can't ask El Gamal about the mystery of him death. But you can ask Dame Barbara about the license to kill. Ask the DPP about the license to kill. You can't ask Ibrahim about the CS gas attack. You can't ask Mrs. Jarrett how she get her heart attack. You can't ask Oliver Price about the grip round him neck. And you can't ask Steve Boyce about him death by neglect. But you can ask the PCA about the license to kill. Ask the ACPO about the license to kill. You can ask Maggie Thatcher about the license to kill. And you can ask John Major about the license to kill. You can ask Michael Howard about the license to kill. And you can ask Jack Straw about the rule of law. You can ask Tony Blair if him is aware or care about the license to kill that plenty police feel them got.
And so if somewhere like London can change through hard fighting, like I'm talking real confrontation of the racism, the xenophobia, the anti-immigration sentiment, the colonial mindset that existed in the individuals who were there when our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents started to arrive en masse, and we were capable of confronting it and turning the city around into a city that many of us love, then why is that not possible with other places? Why have we conceded that ground? Why have we decided that the other places should simply be written off? Why are we not pushing for that same change in other places, especially being led by the individuals, the Black British people who live in those places, so that they can experience their own havens? It is in our best interest as Black Londoners. Plenty of us are not built to live in cities, you know. Many of us were actually built to live in small towns and rural communities. And so it is very much in our best interest and in the interest of Black life that it's capable of existing in many different ways, whether it's urban or whether it's rural. Your children should be able to make the choice to go and live in the country and be safe should we get this fight right. Instead of us transforming the city has begun to reconstitute us. Our politics is shaped by its institutions. Our ambitions are completely tethered to the ceilings that exist in London. Our solidarity has shrunk down to postcodes, and honestly, I feel embarrassed as a Black Londoner sometimes when I listen to Black Londoners talk about these things. I'm not saying to leave, because this is why people want to beat my ass on the internet every time I speak about this. I'm not saying that London is the enemy or that being here makes you complicit in something you can't undo, okay? That is not the argument that is happening here. The argument I'm trying to make is about a reorientation. Wear Londoner lightly, as a circumstance, as a fact of your life. Wear Black deeply, as a condition, as a commitment, as a thing that holds across every single city, every migration, every generation. You should be able to leave London and recognize Blackness in others and know you're safe because that Black person is there. Hopefully, if they're not can I say that word? Hopefully, if they're not a deeply white supremacist programmed individual. And if you're scared, like, oh, outside of London, there are loads of Black people who resemble North American rodents that are black and white and grey, then I'm sorry to tell you, I'm sorry to break this information to you, but there's plenty of those kinds of Black people in London. Probably even much more so because they have access to certain things that other people don't, that can convince them that they're not who they are. Kemi. I want us to be able to redirect our solidarity beyond the area in which we live. Not because Provincial Black Life needs your charity, but because it has things that it can teach us, and London honestly can take a lot from us. Look to the villages, the literal and metaphorical ones, for the lessons of interdependence that we so desperately need and keep failing to build. I want us to identify with our Blackness, to be quite frank, more than we identify with being Londoners. And start asking, honestly, whether your politics are yours or whether you've subcontracted them to a brand, whether you've confused your location and the area that you live in with your liberation. London doesn't belong to us, and I think that's what I started off saying on the internet when I got cooked this one time. Like, London doesn't belong to us, and I meant it when I said it. And it doesn't mean that you need to leave the city. It doesn't mean that I'm doing the work of, I don't know, reform by saying that it doesn't belong to us. London is a global city. It has participated in the stories of so many individuals all over the world, especially considering Britain's colonial history. London is important to many communities, and if we want to not feel so insecure in our placement in the city, then I think part of that is actually accepting that it doesn't belong to us, but that can be quite a liberating thing because it means we can go anywhere, and we should be able to identify with other Black British people and be embraced the way that we would with cousins, instead of seeing them as those scary out of the M25 jungle blacks, because that's how you guys sound.